Good morning, everybody. It's Valerie Ling here, clinical psychologist. And I suppose my focus at the moment is in recasting the idea of burnout prevention to revitalization work. It's a more positive, forward-looking way of looking at staying afloat while being highly engaged in the type of work or purpose-driven activity that you see for yourself. So I was on the way to soak in the tub last night, as you do, when I walked past a loved one who was sitting down to work on their 2019 goals. Isn't that fantastic? I love to watch how we can actually be forward planning and forward thinking, and even at this time of the year. And it caught my eye because as I was watching them think through what their 2019 goals were, it occurred to me that I was curious. I was highly engaged by the activity. And so I was standing up and they were sitting down, and I was literally just, with my towel on my shoulder, walking away when we engaged in dialogue, which then led to me finding a piece of paper and pencil and then starting to write some things down, which then led to me sitting down. And it occurred to me that what we had actually just done was a really quick audit as to where this person's thought was, and we lifted what they were doing from a discussion about goals and things to do to actually a conversation about how do you remain revitalized and focused. Good morning, thanks for joining me. So I actually wanted to write down that simple process for you, what we actually talked about when we elevated the conversation from a list of goals to a conversation of, well, first we need to know actually what is our aspirations. So a lot of times let me see, can you see that? I think this is where my camera is going to fail me because everything is going to go reverse, I think. Is that reversed? Yes, it is. Okay. I'll just draw pictures at this point. A lot of times we rely on a list of goals that are actually, how should I say, the list of all the things that we didn't get done in 2018, and then we think that that's what we want to do for 2019. And it's actually driven by a sense of sometimes perfectionism, sometimes fatalism, because we're not actually reflecting on, the process is just reflecting on what we didn't do and then kind of beating ourselves up about it and thinking, oh, well, that's the leftovers that we're going to bring into 2019. And we also get into this situation where we then get really gung-ho and in a moment of inspiration commit to things like resolutions, and then that's our focus and our direction for 2019. One of the things that cycles in and out of a burnout posture is that we actually push ourselves hard to run on a treadmill for goals that we think we should do, and the fire underneath our backside really is a sense that we failed. We didn't do it, and so we need to push harder. So it actually leads to, I guess for me, the glorification of busy. That we actually start to feel like if we are completely engaged, completely busy, not engaged, but completely busy, then we must be faithful to the goals that we set for ourselves in the year. What will happen though in this sort of a cycle is that by the time you get halfway, you're falling behind. And then by the time you get to this time of the year, you're actually feeling like you failed. And then the cycle keeps going. So rather than relying on fits of inspiration or guilt, so inspiration is kind of an emotional quality that comes usually in bursts with some creativity, I would encourage you to think about your aspirations. Aspirations are maybe a little bit higher than a vision. An aspiration is actually when you think about for not just for your year in 2019, but in general, right? It's the tombstone thing. When it comes to the end, and when someone's actually putting together your tombstone or your eulogy, what will be said about you? what will actually be spoken of you. It speaks of a legacy. It speaks of a change and a difference that you want to see happen. So what is that? That's the first thing to actually figure out. Good morning, Kim. How are you doing? So for me, for example, an aspiration is a world without burnout. Now that's not a SMART goal. It's not necessarily a vision for where I see myself or my organization in 5 or 10 years, but it is an aspiration. And that aspiration comes very deeply from a belief that burnout is systemic and it can be treated once we figure out the individual factors, the system factors, and the organizational factors. So the first thing to figure out is your aspiration. And an aspiration needs to go further than a vision, right? It needs to go further up from a vision. And your vision for yourself or your organization, you probably see it from, a time perspective, sort of when, 5, 10, 15 years, where you actually see yourself or your organization. Your aspiration, though, is the change that you want to make, the difference you want to introduce. And from there, you make your vision statements. And then, excuse me, and then you cast down your mission statements, and then your values and the behaviors that guide and propel that vision, but very much feed into the ultimate aspiration, okay? So when we are actually looking then at the sorts of goals that we want to put into achieving that vision, very often, particularly in high achievers, we have this kind of target or bullseye approach where there's usually just one goal that I have to meet. Okay, sometimes you may just have 2 goals. So for example, if I put in my goal over there, so let's say, a world without burnout, in 5 years, I would like to actually see that I've been able to make an impact in blah, 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 blah. And my mission, therefore, is to work blah, 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 blah. And the values that sustain it are those things, and the behaviors that underpin it are those things. And I'm starting to work out my goals. Perfectionistic thinking tends to only have one goal. And so if I say that goal is I must have, it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, and I say something along the lines of I need to deliver, let's say 5 workshops with a goal of, a particular financial number and things like that. If that is not achieved, right, I'm actually going to feel like I failed somehow, right? But when you are actually trying to remain vital, what you actually want to do is actually have several goals and micro goals. And here's the key. It moves away from bullseye thinking to flexible thinking, adaptable thinking. I can move left, right, side, up, down. Good morning, Gerda. Thanks for joining me. In order to achieve a higher order goal, in order to achieve my mission, in order to fulfill a vision, in order to stay the path of my aspiration. Now, very often what I tend to see is that when we are burning out, we've only fixated on this. That one goal becomes our guiding mission, becomes the entire vision in our eyes, and becomes the only path, And so perfectionism and some other things that we talk about in terms of, self-sacrifice and all of that pushes this, push. And what you're actually going to find is that you get further and further away from the path, because you can't be flexible or adaptable when stuff happens. When stuff happens, you basically revisit the macro goal, the various ways that you're going to stay faithful to that macro goal, and you adapt the micro goals, right? You figure out where else you can go to get to that point. And all the while, you're actually saying to yourself, that's because the path is worth pursuing. A world without burnout is worth pursuing. And if I can't pursue that at the moment, I can actually flex to my micro goals, and I have several of them. Now, then there's many layers underneath. The to-do really comes right down the bottom. You can't to-do before you know where to go. You like that? You got to do before you work out where to go. And I'll finish with this. And my observation is that we're overcast by a vision that is more inspiration or more to do. We actually haven't figured out the aspiration, and that's my encouragement to you. Sit down and figure out the aspiration. And if you want to do it with me, I've got a once in a lifetime opportunity at the moment. I actually don't do any clinical work in January. I completely clock off. I don't go to the practice to see in-person clients because I'm actually heading here. This is my time. I have my summer reading list, and we get figuring that out. But I do have created some space though to sit down with you. If this was you in 2018, I want to see you be this in 2019. Why don't you do it with me? I'll put the link. See you later.